mostly what I've written in the past has been short films, but I have written one feature film in the past too. And I tend to always try and work on honing my skills every day. So I'm just trying to share a little bit of that with you today.
Yeah, and I'm Matt Quinn. I'm the co-chair of the screenwriting department here at DePaul. I'm a screenwriter myself, story analyst for many years, and looking forward to talking about some screenwriting.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for being here today, Matt. Obviously, the first place that we need to start is the first draft. So getting right to it, a lot of times you'll hear this term called vomit draft thrown around when you're writing your first draft. And basically, the way I would describe that is basically just getting everything onto the paper, because if you want to try and take something of an idea to paper is typically a pretty difficult task, and to actually get to a completed first draft is a milestone in itself. So we consider this the vomit draft just because you need to get the things on paper for you to later down the line shape it and mold it into something that you can actually shoot. So yeah, this is just getting thoughts onto paper. This doesn't have to look pretty, and it probably won't look pretty either. It just needs to be formatted with character names, you know, the typical screenplay formatting. And you need to accept the fact that it probably will need a lot of polishing. So yeah, like I said, it's going to take, I don't think there's ever been a time where I've written something on the first draft and gone and shot it right away. So we're going to talk today about rewriting and taking feedback and really polishing from that first draft into a good shooting script. And again, start from the basics. If you've never written a script before, these are some softwares that are really helpful in writing scripts. The first one is Celtics, I believe is how it's pronounced, or Celtics, one of the two. It's a free online platform where you just go to Celtics.com and you can start writing screenplays from there right away, which is the first place that I read a screenplay, and it's super helpful. And then once you start to become more serious, you can move into Final Draft, which is pretty much the industry standard. And then there's other options like Movie Magic. They have a screenwriting software, as well as another online platform at Studio Binder. But the top two are definitely going to be Celtics and Final Draft. So look into those if you're interested in writing your first screenplay. So again, yeah, you're taking an idea to a screenplay. It's a milestone, so you need to really break it down into how can you actually accomplish this. Writing a feature film or a TV show or a short film, we're going to bring it all the way back to the historical third act structure, 3-act structure, because it's just something that we need. It's a place where we need to start whenever we're writing screenplays. So for me, I like to break it down into 3 acts with 2 sub-acts being in the act 2. So you start with act 1. It's usually going to be about 25 pages if you're writing a feature film. And then you move into act 2 and you break that in half as well. So act 2 is typically 50 pages, and you're able to basically quarter your 3-act structure and then lead into act 3 with another 25 pages. And this is just a really good way for us as screenwriters to really accomplish the goal of getting to a final form of a first draft. So here's a little graphic, and now I'd like to break it to Matt now, and I want to ask you, what is the importance of structure? Like how important is it to you that everything that you write be structured, whether it be in this 3-act form or however other way that you choose to structure a screenplay?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think anybody who's into screenwriting is probably pretty big on structure. I think to me, you know, no matter what form of story you're telling, like you were saying, like whether it be a short film or a TV pilot, half-hour, 1-hour feature, you know, they still have the same 3 movements of beginning, middle, and end. And I think that's how you have to kind of approach structures. Structure is going to help you move through those movements of telling a story, from going from your beginning, which is essentially equivalent to a setup, the middle, which is equivalent to that, you know, exploring that main conflict that you're introducing, and then resolving that conflict in the end of the story. And I think that pattern, you know, is the same regardless of the format that you're doing. But I will say, though, that the structures are usually unique based on the length of the project. So what you're showing here on the slide is the structure that's usually used for a feature-length film. A short film structure will be slightly different, and the same for TV, or whether it be 1 hour or a half hour. What you don't want to do is try to take this sort of structure we're looking at right now for an hour and a half long movie and try to wedge that into an 8-minute short. It's obviously not going to work. But I think, to me, there's always so many different theories on structure. But the one thing to me is that it's going to provide that dramatic spine for your story, and to make sure that there's sort of unity to your story on the whole. And that's why I think it's so important. The difference in vocabulary, the definitions that people try to give to all these different plot points, these are just ways to help your character move from that setup, confrontation, resolution. So yeah, definitely structure is something that I would start off with very, very early in the process. After coming up with a concept, that's the next thing that I would take a close look at for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a great point about differentiating between the different styles of film, whether it be TV, feature film, or short film. And that brings me into my next slide here on something that I can talk about with my experience of short film writing. So the last time that I wrote a short film, it was co-written with one of my roommates, and we had discovered this sort of graph that really helped us break down how to structure a short film. And as DePaul students, this is the bulk of what we're going to be doing and writing as writers, and eventually getting produced and made, is going to be short films. So really take a look at this. If you've never seen this before, this is about taking a character into an unfamiliar zone and bringing them back out of that unfamiliar zone. And like I said, this is what I used for my last short film that I wrote, and I found it super helpful because obviously before discovering this, I was trying to apply all of these feature film tidbits that I was learning in class to short film structure, and it wasn't working for me. And I found myself stuck in situations where I was trying to get to a certain plot point that was supposed to be in a feature film and squeeze it into a short film, but it wasn't working because obviously they're two different formats, right? So we all need to understand that short films are meant to be structured different than feature films. And this graph is, to me, really describes how to hit all those plot points in a short film. And you start with the character in a comfort zone, and then we hit each plot point going around the circle. We can skip to plot point number 3, which is the big plot point of taking them into an unfamiliar zone. And through the bottom of this circle here, we take them through, they adapt to the new situation, they get what they want, and they pay for a heavy price. And this is all in their unfamiliar zone. And for me, that's something that can be applied to many short films and should be the go-to film structure, because then when we take them out of that unfamiliar zone, we can either have them change or have them not change, because this last plot points can be up to us as screenwriters and how we want our character to develop or not develop based on the entertainment value that we're trying to come across with. But yeah, this is, if you've ever seen this before, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, then this is going to be gold for you, because it really helped me in my last screenplay that I wrote. And a great example of that structure, which you can pick out beat for beat, is in the short film Stutterer, which was shot in 2015 and won the Best Live Action Short Film Award at the Academy Awards. And like I said, if you've ever seen this, or if you've never seen this, look it up, because you'll be able to pick out every one of those plot points beat for beat. It hits it from 1 through 8, and I think it's fantastic, and everybody should see it as a learning lesson. So breaking out from structure, there's one thing that I want to talk about, which I find not to be talking about too much in film school. It's about writer's block. And a lot of the times I've gone through, being in my senior year now, not really knowing like how to overcome it, because there hasn't been a lot of discussion in classes. But being in a class with Matt now, he had a really interesting take on on what writer's block is. So Matt, if I break it away to you, could you talk about what writer's block is to you and how you personally overcome it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're referring to, I don't know if what I said in class or not, but I kind of have some unique views, I think, on the writing process. Like before, you had a slide on vomit drafts. That's not something I'm a big believer in either. And similar to kind of like the writer's block stuff, I always, I I always think like writer's block is not really a thing. Like for me as a writer, I haven't really experienced it, which I know is a weird thing to say. I know like it exists and certainly people like endure it. But what I always think is like I kind of approach it of like there's never been a time where I couldn't write anything, like it's sort of like this idea of, excuse my language, like I believe in shitty writing, like there you can always write something. And I think that's what you kind of have to force yourself to do. And I think it's when you kind of labor over, a certain point, or you're trying to get something right, is where you kind of get stuck in your head on this stuff. And another like really, and this kind of goes back to the vomit draft thing, that the more you outline and the more prep work you do, it really helps you avoid any sort of writer's block. And I think that's something that's really helped me, is to realize just how important that outlining process is. And the other thing that helps me is that I have a writing partner, so I'm never writing alone. I'm always not, even though we never write in the same room, there's always somebody to collaborate with. And that also really, really helps too. So obviously talking to a friend and really having a platform to kind of talk out these ideas, I think also can really help with writer's block. I think writers in general, and as a lot of creatives, are just really good at procrastination. And so I think it's just kind of like having to force yourself to create something. Sometimes it's easy to kind of fall back on this idea of like writer's block. But if you can do any form of writing, if you're going through this, then I think it's a win. Whether or not it's any good, that's I guess up for debate. But I do think collaborating with other people, trying to just talk out some of these ideas, and the more outlining you can do, are I think two really solid ways to try to get over this writer's block. How about for you though? Like what have you done in the past when you've encountered this? Or how would you describe writer's block?
For me, it's almost a point of stagnation where it's only happened to me one time before, and it was on the one feature film that I've ever written. And it was just, like you said, it was a lack of outlining, where I was trying to figure out a way to get my character out of in its climax. It was on the climax where I didn't know how to end the film. And like I figured out after, where I just hadn't thought through like how to get that character out of the situation. So I went through probably 8 different endings of that feature film, and then finally when the 8th one wasn't working, I felt like there was no way that this film could ever end. And I felt defeated in that situation. But obviously it's because I didn't have it planned out before in the outline. I had picked one ending to the film where it was, for lack of better words, like it was just unplanned. Like it was just something that I wanted to end the film with and didn't give much thought to. So like you said, and you also mentioned earlier too, like a writing partner. Like that was one thing that I actually really benefited from in the last short film that I wrote, was I started working with a writing partner. And had I had a writing partner for that feature film, I feel like I would have been able to overcome that obstacle a little bit better. But in a time, there's no solving my problem.
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly on that, normally, of course, you would want to try to figure out that ending before, because your whole script is sort of predicated on this cause and effect progression, that every action is leading to a reaction that's going to build up to all these plot points and stuff. But if you find yourself in that position again, another kind of interesting exercise that a lot of writers do is reverse engineering. So like you figure out, you like forget about like trying to figure out how do I get from here to the end, but you think about, okay, what's my ending? Like what's the best ending the story could have? And then you start taking the steps back to where you are. And it's like, well, how do I get back to where I was if this is the ending that I want? And that sometimes can help with that too, because that's tough. Like if you are, on page 75, whatever, and it's like, I just have no idea how I'm going to get to 100 from here,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I understood it when I got to that point too, that I probably should have had a way more concrete like ending. But to me, I was more in love with how I was setting up. It was like, to me, everything that my script that I liked was the build up and the micro interactions that I had. And I lacked the ability to plan the macro, which was obviously the ending, which, like you said, like that should be like one of the first things that you know when you're going into, because it's like your compass. Great. Yeah, so that was good. I'm super glad I asked you about writer's block, because I don't think a lot of people hear that. Not for me personally, at least. So that brings me into feedback then. So now you've got a first draft. You've actually gotten all your ideas onto paper, and now it's time for feedback. And this is just a little tidbit that I've heard before, and it says you can't rewrite a script without feedback the same way you can't walk in the dark without a light. And the first time I heard that, I was like, well, yeah, I didn't put two and two together right away, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of times we as filmmakers, or me personally, have experienced that in the beginning, I felt like I could do everything by myself, but once you are actually able to understand that this is a collaborative process, you help yourself a lot better just by submitting to the fact that you can't do this all on your own. So the first four topics that I want to talk about feedback is that you need to send it to people that you trust. That is number one in my rule book, and I feel like Matt can say the same, because if you don't send it to people that you trust, then you don't know what kind of feedback you're going to be getting. And then second, you're going to have to meet all those notes with open arms, whether you like the note or you don't like the note, or if it's a good note or if it's a bad note. Take everything in and understand that it's saying something about your script, whether you like, like I said, whether you like it or not. And then organize everything into a document. This is one thing that I've been a victim of before. It's told myself, like, oh, I'm just going to remember like what you said, like later, and then I didn't write something down, or maybe it was like just a casual conversation, but everything that you hear about an entity that you're giving to somebody else is going to be valuable information, and you should write that down and organize it into a document, and then identify what isn't working, because that's what's gonna benefit your screenplay the most, is when you figure out what those two things are. And okay, so if you find yourself in a situation where you can actually give feedback now, right? You're part of this circle of people who trust each other and are gonna pass scripts around. Where do you start? For me, my advice would be that you guys, and this is the order that I would do it. You start with what you liked. It's a good enter into a feedback session is if you always start with something that you like, because that sort of sets things up for if maybe something really bad isn't working, at least you can start with something that was good about the screenplay, and then you can move into broader notes about how the story made you feel, because obviously films are supposed to make you feel a certain way, and if you share those feelings with the writer, then they can understand better if they achieved what they were trying to achieve with the mood and the feeling of the writing. And then if whether you are giving feedback on paper or in person, bring up things that didn't make sense, because this is going to start the series of questions between the person giving feedback and the person receiving feedback, because those questions of like, what did you mean by this, or why is this character doing this? You can start to get into those things just by bringing up things that don't make sense to you, because that's valuable information. And then you get into all the specifics. So this can be broken down into character, plot, structures, and themes. And it's basically like a funnel that you want to get down to. So you start broad, and then you get into the specifics, because the specifics are where all the valuable information is on what isn't working. Same way, you can give good feedback. There's a method to getting good feedback as well too, and that's just by asking questions. So if you're giving somebody a script and you're just telling them, hey, read this script and then tell me what you think about it, that's great. But if you give them a little bit of direction in what you're actually looking for in a script, I feel like you can get more concise feedback on what you're looking to figure out about what how your writing style is, and ask questions like, was the story clear? If not, what wasn't clear? You can ask questions like, was it believable? Because believability is a huge part of filmmaking, because if somebody doesn't believe a sci-fi story, then the sci-fi is not science fiction at all, it's just fake, because we're trying to make a movie here. So you gotta ask if it's believable. That's one of the good questions. And then ask about scenes if something wasn't working, and then ask about what they did like. And then the big point that I want to bring up at the bottom here is, I said this once already, but you need to trust the people that you're sending to. I put a little line through no family, because if you're sending it to family, the odds are that they're always going to like what you write, and that's usually not the most honest feedback, even though we all love our family and our moms and grandmas and aunties, but they're always gonna like your scripts, at least from what I found, hopefully. These are a couple documents that I like to use when getting feedback, because it just helps you stay organized. So the little sheet on the left is after you've gotten feedback already, just helps you stay organized on all the notes that you've gotten, depending on how many people you've sent it to. And it just breaks it down into what works, what needs work. But the important part is the column on the right, because those are the solutions and strategies to fixing those problems that may arise in your screenplay. So a note is just a note unless you figure out a solution to what that problem is. And then the document on the right is something that you would send somebody with your script looking for feedback. And that just allows them to put little check marks on what they think was good or not good as they're reading it, or once they're done. It just helps you keep a list if you're sending it to a lot of people on common trends of what people think of the plot and dialogue and setting and structure and things like that. So now we're going to move into talking about identifying what is and isn't working. And the big thing that I know about receiving notes is if you hear something 3 times, then you know that that note is valid. So if you hear that the dialogue seems a little choppy and non-believable, and you hear that from 3 different people, then you're definitely going to want to go in and start polishing up a little bit of the dialogue and figuring out how to adjust from there, because you've heard it 3 times. Same thing with anything else, whether it be character, dialogue, or setting, or plot. If you hear it 3 times, it's definitely a note that you want to remember and fix. And then obviously you need to develop solutions to those problems. So like I said earlier, a note is just a note unless you have a solution to what the problem is with the script. And that can be done through collaboration. That can be done through you developing ideas by yourself. But like me and Matt have said earlier, it's really easy to find solutions when you have more minds put together. So collaboration is huge. And you always need to remember that whenever you're receiving feedback, it's about critiquing the writing, not the writer. So we don't need to internalize anything that's negative towards the script, because that's obviously going to make us eventually a better writer, because we're trying to fix the writing, not the writer. So not every note that you're going to receive is going to benefit the screenplay in the moment, but you still need to meet it with open arms, because it's assigned to you. So, and to me, the way that I view feedback, whether it be constructive or unconstructive, I find there to be a lot of value in every note that's given to me, just because if it's telling me something to do, it could mean something else in the script isn't working. So an example that I'd like to bring up is when I was getting feedback on a script that I had written, I had a classmate tell me that I should kill my main character in the end. And I thought, like, immediately, I was like, well, there's no way, like, I'm going to kill my main character in the end. Like, I've done all this work to get him to this point. Now I want him to, like, prevail. I want him to learn, and I want him to be better. But to me, what that really meant was there's a flaw in the character that didn't justify him prevailing. So even though the note was about killing my character in the end, and it was not a great note to begin with, because it was telling me to do something instead of telling me how something wasn't working, what that then meant to me was there's flaws in the character that need to be fixed prior to this climactic moment of whether the character lives or dies. And save all of the notes that you get to, because even if you go back like draft after draft after draft, like there could be notes that you thought weren't valuable at the beginning and kind of dismissed to the side that end up being useful later. That brings me to a point where I wanted to throw it to Matt, where I want to know, has there ever been like a point where you've saved feedback that you thought wasn't useful initially and then have gone back to later in the writing process?
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing I would just add about all of this too is that even though we do this in classes where we're kind of giving you feedback along the way, like I do feel like there's a lot of benefit to trying to hold off on getting a lot of feedback, especially when you're in the middle of writing a script, until it's done. Because what can happen a lot is if you're constantly giving people things that are in progress and not finished, there's this tendency to want to go back and restart, and you never really get something finished. This is always a problem when students are trying to write a feature, and it's for faculty trying to figure out like how much feedback should we give that is not going to completely derail the writing process, because we want you to finish the script, have a completed story, and then go back and be able to kind of break it down. It's a lot easier to do with shorts, but I would try to hold off on kind of getting feedback until like you finish that first draft, aside from getting feedback during the the idea stage. For myself too, like I think when it comes to getting feedback, I sort of take an approach like Olympic scoring. I don't know if you guys know, like where they go, like that for the judges, like they'll take the highest score and the lowest score, and then they get rid of those. And I kind of do the same thing. So like if somebody like really, really loved the script, I try to ignore that. And if somebody really, really hated it, I try to ignore that too. And I kind of look for those notes that are kind of in the center, because I feel like either of those could send you down like the wrong path. And for your question about like coming back to stuff, yeah, especially if like something's not working, for a while, and you initially kind of dismiss the note, and then it's like, well, maybe we should go and eventually try that. I know for a script that we had, my writing partner and I had some success on, I always felt like the third act of the story was kind of a problem, and I knew that there was a solution, but it was going to require a lot of rewriting, so I was like hesitant to make the change. But I realized that like I had this big like dramatic action set piece at the end of Act Two, and so what we decided to do is just completely get rid of like a majority of the third act, and we just moved that final set piece, that action set piece, as our new third act. And so then I just had to go back and just add another like, complication in the journey to extend it out so it'd be the same number of pages. And the story was much tighter overall, and because that third act always almost felt like a different movie. But it was one of those things where it was kind of like, let's wait until we sort of have to do that, because we knew how much kind of work was involved in moving all that kind of stuff around. So yeah, I do think it's good to save all these notes. Another thing I would mention too is that when you're making your list of notes, I don't think it's practical to try to address every single note that you get. It's not going to work. And usually you want to kind of approach each draft and to fix like one or two major things. And anything more than that, it can kind of, you kind of lose focus of what you're trying to fix, So I think that's another reason to kind of save notes. Like I would try to address like character structural issues first and foremost, because those are the most dominant, parts of the story. But then maybe in another draft, go back and fix some dialogue things, or maybe go fix some other smaller note that somebody gave. So yeah, no, I think it's always good just to save your notes and be able to go back to it, especially if you have that kind of thing where you couldn't just crack the story and maybe there's something there that you can kind of revisit for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You make a good point about being concise in taking the notes, which I don't. Yeah, so that brings me into rewriting then, which so you start with the self-critique, but what Matt was talking about with being concise is you need to develop a plan. So developing a rewrite plan, to me, means being concise with a couple of things that you want to really focus on when you're doing pass-throughs of rewriting. And I put this picture up in the corner as well too, because rewriting is basically everything that you need, like for taking a first draft to a shooting script, because that's what's really making your screenplay, is going through the rewriting process. And then breaking it down again into 4 sections like we talked about earlier with the first draft is this really helps you again sort of compartmentalize tackling a rewrite and tackling any writing in general, is when you're able to break it up into the 4 sections and take it down, because it's a milestone in itself. And then the last bullet point I have here is applying notes and revision log, just again staying organized and whatnot. So I want to start with the self-critique, because the self-critique I feel like is part of the rewriting process, because it's basically still feedback but for yourself, and it's a way for you to write down your thoughts on your own script. So technically you're the one writing. I don't know, this could get, the lines are a little blurred, but I put it in with the rewriting process because you're actually starting to write things down yourself. But it's important to do because you need to ask yourself these questions of where you started when you really wanted to write this script. Ask yourself questions like, does this story reflect what I originally intended? What are the strengths and weaknesses? Being honest with yourself of what you actually do like about your script and what you don't like. And then what are your goals of the rewrite? So this is all going into the rewrite plan because, as Matt mentioned, which I wanted to get to here, is the rewrite plan basically is a way for you to tell yourself to tackle things, so like compartmentalize the things that you want to address initially. So you could have overall problems that aren't working, which is a problem that you can address, yes, but the best way to start going through this rewrite is to be concise on one thing that really isn't working. So whether that be, maybe there's plot holes, right? So maybe the characters jump from point A to point B and it doesn't make sense how they got there. That could be one thing that you really want to focus on. And you see that multiple times as a problem in your screenplay. Maybe that should be something that you should focus on in your first pass through, along with maybe one other thing where it could be like, maybe this character could be a little bit more present or as like a supporting character rather than like a sideline character. So things like that. You need to really develop this plan, because that's what's really going to help you get from point A to point B again too. So when we talk about rewriting it, it seems like a daunting task, but when you break it down into a plan where you tell yourself, if A happens, then B is going to happen, and if B happens, then C is going to happen, that really helps you understand how you can get from a first draft to a second draft, and then from a second draft to a third draft, because rewriting is writing. So this is about breaking down your rewriting goals into 5 main sections. So if there's one or two things you're going to want to focus on in a pass through, it's going to be probably one of these 5 things. It's going to be character, plot, theme, structure, and then miscellaneous if you want to focus on like maybe dialogue, or if you anything else that might be in your screenplay. But you want to list it out as a problem that is underneath one of these main lines here. So maybe there's a problem with a character, and you list that problem out. And then under that problem, you provide a goal, and however many goals you want to achieve with that one problem. And those goals could be solutions to that problem. Those goals could be broad in taking a character to a certain situation. But really what you want to do is you want to bullet point, break it down all the way to a point where you get to a sub goal of what does this really mean? Why is this character doing this thing? And really understanding why you're making the changes that you are to the script. And that brings me to a revision log. Actually, I wanted to take a second to ask Matt about the rewrite plan too. So same way that I asked you about structure earlier, how important is it to have a rewrite plan and being concise going forward through revisions?
Yeah, I think the more planning you can do is great. The most ineffective way to rewrite anything is just to open the script file and stare at page 1, because then you're just going to change, like action description, you might change a line of dialogue, but you're not getting at the heart of what may not be working in the script. So thinking about some of these bigger issues, like the overall character arc, the characters themselves, structure, all these things, I think is really smart to do, and having some kind of plan of attack, just like with outlining, makes a lot of sense. It's not... None of this stuff, like the outlining, these rewrite plans, none of it's fun, right? But it's going to make your job and your life so much easier the more work you put into this. Writing the script is really the fun part. It's, thinking about all these things that's time consuming. At least for myself, again, I can't speak to every other writer. It's funny because I feel like I spend very little time actually writing like a script. And I spend like all my time thinking about it and doing exercises like this. Yeah, that's what whenever I'm trying to break a story and stuff, this is the stuff that I'm consumed with, is like figuring out, well, how does the structure work? How do what are the characters and all this stuff? That's what a majority of my time spent on. And when I get to the script, it's just, you're just cranking out pages at that point based on all the hard work you did before. I don't really understand, I guess, how you cannot write that way. I have done it before, but unsuccessfully. And that's where I've encountered things like, I guess writer's block, or this other kind of just, you're just paralyzed by the, like not knowing what to do next. So I totally agree. I think what you have laid out here is definitely a smart plan of attack for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we brought it up a couple times already, and it's paralyzing. Yeah. If you don't plan out, the buzzword right there is it becomes paralyzing because you don't know where to go. And it just makes your world a whole lot easier and this is why we're doing the quarter prep too, right? So it makes your life a whole lot easier when you plan things out, because the more you prep, the easier the execution is going to be. Great. Okay, so that brings me into the revision log then. This is just another document that I like to use when going through rewriting. It's just basically a checklist of things that you want to accomplish, and you can attach this to your rewrite plan as well too. So the same way that we had it broken down with bullet points of problems and goals and sub goals, this is going to act off as like it's just another title that's going to be like included inside of your rewrite plan and just helps you visualize like what the things that you've checked off of the changes that you want made. So if you're able to be concise in what you want to accomplish in a rewrite, and then be concise in the actual execution of changing that in a script, you can like reflect that in this revision log, and it just makes your life a whole lot easier. And then lather, rinse, repeat. And you can go through rewrites after rewrites, and there's different ways that you can label rewrites, whether it be with colors or with dates, or colors and dates. I think that there's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but rewriting is the heart and soul of the film, because you're just getting closer and closer to an actual shooting script, and that's what's most important, is getting to that point. And Matt, I want to break it away to you again and ask you, when does the rewriting process end? I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but I want to ask you here on this workshop on when do you think that you're supposed to stop rewriting? And because for me personally, I've heard of projects that get rewritten all the way until the day before shooting. But coming from you, I want to hear, when do you think that you're done with the project?
I mean, you're talking about a couple different things there with, like projects can certainly get rewritten even on set, and new pages can be given to an actor, but that's after it's been acquired and greenlit and, actually in active production. I think as a screenwriter, you have to decide like when you have done as much work that you could potentially do in a project, and when you're at a certain point, you're just sort of spinning your wheels, and it may be a good idea to move on to something next. So I think you'd want to, of course, do your due diligence by giving it, as you said, to trusted readers, and making sure that if you have 5 trusted readers, that a majority, 3 to 4 of those readers are coming back and saying, hey, this is good, this is ready to go into production, or this is good, this is ready to take out, if you're going to try to sell something professionally. And I think that's when you kind of, feel good about, where the script is at. But the truth is, I mean, you can just keep rewriting forever. So there does have to be a point where you have to decide, like, this is it. And in some instances, that can be a pretty sad time, like unless you're actively going into production with it yourself, but it's kind of like you've been working on this thing for a while, and it's almost kind of like, this is as good as I can make it right now, and I'm going to move on to something else. And I think there's at least a moment, where you're kind of like, I'm going to miss this project for a little bit and go on to this new thing. I'm certain my writing partner and I are kind of going through that right now, because we just had finished a pilot and are kind of in this process that you're talking about getting feedback. And we're kind of at the point where it's like, okay, we're going to continue to shop this around, but we're also moving on to something new too. So I think this is such a lame answer, but like when you know, and I think at a certain point you're kind of like, I'm done with this,
Yeah, for sure. That makes me curious now too, as well. Like, has there ever been a project of yours that you have taken to a person, and then it started going through the pre-production of being made, and then you lost creative control of what is happening with the rewrites? And like, how did you like navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. If, like a lot of times you're working with a production company, and, we may talk about like option agreements and things, but if you're acting in good faith with like a producer, they're going to expect you to make some alterations to the script. And so you have a choice, like, do I want to execute these changes knowing that it'll increase their enthusiasm for the project, which will then make them want to try to go out and get actors and directors and things attached to it? Or do I want to kind of hold the line and say, like, these are my characters, I believe in this story, and I want to stay, knowing that taking that stance may ultimately end the project with that particular producer. But there's been a lot of times too where you get, notes where you're apathetic at best trying to make those changes, and some of the notes can be, because no one really knows your story more than you do. You're the one who's kind of like labored over it and worked and potentially for years and months on this thing, and you really thought about all the characters. And I find that when you start to get at the professional level, a lot of the notes are kind of thin, like they'll say stuff like, make it funnier, right? Or like, make it edgy. And it's like, wow. It's like, should I just have characters slip on banana peels? Like, what do you want? You want just more jokes? Like, what? How about specifics? So it's weird, because I feel like the more advanced you get, sometimes the notes get like more and more vague, and I don't even think they really know. It's almost like, I don't know how to fix this, but I know I don't like the current draft. I feel like that a lot of times that's kind of where they're at, and they almost want you to figure it out without having to do too much. So, but no, that has certainly happened before, where you start to lose creative control, and you start to try to write towards the notes, which can get, this is why what happens is these projects start to then go through this kind of Frankenstein experience where you're bringing in new writers, or that you're getting all this feedback that you don't necessarily want to put in, and the draft starts moving further and further away from what the writer intended. And what's really frustrating is in Hollywood, sometimes you're bringing in new writers, they're on their 10th draft. Every new writer, they keep paying a different writer to do this, and the executive will be like, I really like that first draft we had. What if we go back to that? After like $1 million has been spent, on hiring writers to get it to that stage. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's just something as a writer, you have to try to figure out, what changes am I okay with, and where do I want to try to, hold the line for the integrity of the story.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. That really gives a lot of insight in what we have to look forward to if we get up to that level eventually, right? That's what we're all in film school for right now. Great. So yeah, that brings me to the last thing that I want to talk about into this workshop here is actually getting it made. So we discussed it a little bit of taking it to studios. Obviously, it's a lot of what Matt knows. But me personally, I can speak on the DePaul experience of getting short films made. So yeah, let's kick it off right away with taking a script to a producer or a director. These are the basics right here. Is you just need to have confidence in your draft and your pitch, no matter who you're giving a pitch to. If you're not confident about your story, where you don't know your log line, or you don't know your synopsis or your themes or everything that goes into your script, then it's not gonna land, because you lack that confidence. And from a studio perspective, I guess this is a good habit to get into if you're in the DePaul Film School right now too, is to prepare a one sheet, which is basically just a one-page document that explains the entire story. And I know Matt has his own feelings on this as well too, as we've discussed before. So I will hand the floor over to him as well too, because he's had some experience in pitching to a lot of different companies and getting his work made. So first of all, yeah, with the one page or the one sheet that I mentioned, I'd like to hear what you think about that, on top of what it's like to talk to studios and talk to networks like this.
Yeah, I mean, like the one sheet, there's a couple different uses for that. To me, like a one sheet's really valuable as a development tool while you're trying to get the story down, going from that kind of like log line, one sentence description to kind of a one-page breakdown. And that sort of, it depends like the length of the project. Like if you're just doing a short film, like, maybe a one pager is just, adequate enough. It's almost serves as like a one-page treatment. If you're talking about a feature, it is a way to kind of get a big sort of overview of the larger beats in the story that you have planned. One sheets can also be used professionally, but the Writers Guild, as of late, is really against any sort of leave behind material, because you're basically handing over creative work to the studios. And a lot of times they'll ask for stuff like that. And again, you have this choice to make. Are you going to follow the guidelines set by the Writers Guild, and not leave anything behind? Or are you going to act in good faith and hope that these supplemental materials will increase the enthusiasm of the producer, the executive, the agent? Because a lot of times the people that you're pitching to is not necessarily the final decision maker, and they have to re-pitch whatever you pitch to them to somebody else. So with that in mind, having sometimes like a document or something can be helpful. But again, it's something the Writers Guild is certainly against writers leaving any sort of creative work behind. As far as like pitching to these companies, yeah, it's great. I mean, I think pitching can be, it's a whole like another lecture, right? It can be an extremely stressful situation, but when you have this opportunity, it's basically that somebody has saw value in you as a creative, and there's this opportunity to potentially get your work in front of millions and millions of people, depending on who's looking at it and their level of enthusiasm, and how a project potentially could get fast tracked. So just being able to have that conversation, I think, is always just really exciting. Pitches can also be very frustrating for that similar reason, because they may not come to fruition, or there's just a lot of talking, and there's not a lot of finality to that, because there's a lot of open-endedness. Like, you could go pitch somewhere and then not get an answer for like 3 weeks. They kind of leave you dangling, for a while, and that can be very frustrating. But overall, whether you're pitching to like a major studio or a production company or an agency, or if you're just pitching like you were talking about before, like trying to bring a cinematographer or a director or an even an actor onto your project, it's all great. I mean, like, I just, if you're passionate about this stuff, you're talking about something, for lack of a better descriptor, like fun, right? It's something that you care about. It's not like you're pitching Excel spreadsheets about, some product or some business you don't care about, right? So I think, like, it's always exciting to be able to verbally kind of communicate your ideas to other people, and hopefully that they share the same enthusiasm for your work. And I think the goal is the same, whether you're doing a shorter film or something more professional, is that you want to see your stuff produced and you want to share that with a larger audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about writing partners earlier too. And me personally, I've never pitched with a writing partner, but I know that I know you have a writing partner. We talked about it in this workshop. So I'm curious as to how do you navigate pitching as a tandem, and how is it more beneficial than pitching by yourself?
Yeah, so my writer and partner, we really exclusively almost focus just on comedies. We and any other sort of genres that we explore, it's usually just through the comedy genre. He's a stand-up comic, so that he has like zero. And I teach, so like neither of us really get kind of stage fright at this point. Something I definitely struggled with when I was younger, is just speaking in public. But as I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot more comfortable with it. And so you just have to try to find, like anything else, you just try to find a balance and figure out how you're going to split up the pitch, because normally you would just be one person, organizing the whole pitch and delivering the whole thing. But you have to kind of play off one another, and I try to identify like who, where your strengths lie. So of course my writing partner is really good at telling jokes and kind of focusing on the comedy aspects of the storyline, and really trying to, if there's something in the plot that really needs the joke told well in the room, that's something that he'll take on. I'm more of like a structured story person, so I really try to focus on those types of things when we pitch. So I think, and these can extend to, it's not just like writing partners. Sometimes if you're partnered with a production company, you'll have a producer who will go in and pitch with you. There can be a lot of scenarios where you're not just pitching by yourself. So, but yeah, if you do have a writing partner or somebody else, I think it's great to have more people in the room that shows that enthusiasm. One of the first things I try to talk about when you're talking about pitching is confidence. You have to be confident in yourself, but also confident in the idea, and show enthusiasm for that idea. And I think the more people that are showing that enthusiasm, you're hoping that that's sort of infectious, and that other people in the room are kind of picking up on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is valuable information, because obviously you pitched to some pretty big names here too. So yeah, I mean, confidence, number one, big stuff. I feel like that translates over from all levels, and obviously you can attest to that as well too. So thank you for sharing. So this is just a little thing for students to understand, is if you really want to get student projects made, you have to be prepared to pitch, like me and Matt were just talking about right here. Pitching is the core of getting stuff made. Pitch it to your friends and peers. These are, like, right now, those are the people that are going to get your stuff made. If you have colleagues that you don't really know right now, just try and see if they are interested. Well, I guess technically with this quarter, what we're doing is pitching to eventually make something, because we can't do that right now, obviously, which is why we're doing the quarter prep. But take this time now to practice your pitching. You can take ideas to friends and then workshop them all through until we're on the other side of what we're going through here with this global pandemic, and just throw ideas around. Now's the time. There's no better time than right now to just try and get ideas out to your friends or to your colleagues, peers in school. And these are some ways that I can attest to of actually getting stuff made too, is when in-person classes do resume and we go back to the production classes, like production 1, production 2, and then for me, it's directing classes as well. The best way to get your stuff made is in class assignments. I believe almost everybody has to go through production one in the SCA program. So that's where I made my first short film, was in production one. You know, I wrote and direct that. And if I had never had that opportunity to actually make something in that class, I strongly believe that I would have never catapulted into making more things, because I would have lacked the confidence in actual relative experience in directing and writing and actually making work. So class assignments is huge. If you have an idea of a project that you want to make, take it to one of these classes and be the best one to pitch in that room, because in those classes they're going to ask you to they're going to ask for multiple opinions on what a project should be for a final, for a midterm, and then there's a bunch of different other projects. But if you come with a really strong idea that you're passionate about, you can get that made with a crew that is basically your classmates in that assignment. The other way to do it is independent projects, which is it's a less talked about thing at DePaul, but definitely a huge part of like the DePaul experience, 100%. If you're going to the film school, I believe that a big percentage of your experience at DePaul is going to be working on independent projects and getting stuff made, whether you're working on just a crew position or if you're actually developing and shooting and directing and writing all these projects as well too. And there's a couple different ways that you can do it. They'll be talked about later down the line in other workshops too, because obviously there's a whole workshop to be talked about in the DePaul production office on how to navigate that and write things off the correct way and make sure that you get geared to shoot your projects. But the two ways that I can talk about now is that if you classify it as like an extra credit assignment or an independent study with a professor, and going into independent projects further, I didn't have it listed here as bullet points, but I want to talk about the undergraduate production fund, because that is an awesome way to get funded for any sort of independent project that you want to make and then have it be associated with DePaul University. So that is a grant that DePaul allows you to bring a project to and pitch for the opportunity to actually get money from DePaul to actually make your project. And then I have Indie Studio down here as well too, which is headed by James Choi. And if you're feeling confident enough and if you're feeling ambitious enough, you can go and pitch to DePaul again to get funding to make a feature film, and just by bringing them a script and pitching them on their idea, which is a super ambitious thing, but it's definitely on the table of things that you can do to get your work made here at DePaul. And I know, Matt, I believe you used to be on the board of the undergraduate production fund. So I was wondering if you had any more insights on what the process, like what it looks like to actually go through a pitch sitting on the other side of the table.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been on that committee in a while, but I think what the committee, when I was on, at least what we were looking for, is just how realistic the plan was, and that it extends not just from the pitching part of it, but taking a close look at the script, the budget. If somebody was asking for, their budget was like $100,000 and they had like 50 locations or something, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, let's slow down here a bit. So I think it's just being realistic with what you want to shoot. Sometimes like creative work obviously can be very subjective. So at least when I was on the committee, I was just looking more about the plan and not looking so much on like what I personally thought of the story or anything, because it was like this filmmaker story to tell. And it wasn't really a thing where we were like trying to provide feedback on story so much as it was on feedback on that production plan. So again, you may want to talk to, I believe Andy Stewis is still overseeing that. And he might have some more insight about the specifics of what that committee is looking for. But I think the more planning that you can do with your budget and really trying to trim the script down to just what you need to get the shots you need in order for the story to make sense, all that good stuff, the better your chances will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the same thing goes for the Indie Studio program too. It's the feature film scripts that they're looking for specifically are easily producible scripts that they find value in. So the same way that Matt was talking about pitching to larger networks and studios, DePaul does the same thing with their Indie Studio and undergraduate programs, undergraduate production fund programs that allow for students to go to these committees and pitch and go through the whole shebang. And lastly, I have this little quote here that I'd like to share with everybody. And before we conclude, is you can't fix a bad script after you start shooting. So that's why this workshop is so important. This is all about the writing process and making sure that we come out of this quarter of prep with actual, tangible, good work that you can eventually take wherever you want to, whether you want to host it online or if you wanted to take it to film festivals. You can't fix a bad script after you start shooting, which I'm sure Matt can agree with as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, like I think, filmmaking is definitely a collaborative process. And even if you're doing something solo, you're still, kind of wearing different hats through the process. And like what we were covering today is this idea that at this stage, you are the screenwriter and you kind of have to put your screenwriter hat on and you have to have the strongest, template possible before you go into production. And to think that you can fix it in production or fix it in post, it's just going to be, a recipe for disaster. So I, really agree with this quote and all the things that you kind of highlighted today, that, the more that you can sort of not jump over the screenwriting process, because I know sometimes the lure of production and even in post, depending on what your area of focus is, can kind of pull you away from this. But I think the more time that you spend on the story and getting the story right, it'll pay off in the long run with a more successful film.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, that concludes this workshop. Thanks again, Matt, for being here. I believe we do have time for questions at the end. So Miles, I don't know if you're still here moderating the questions.
Yeah, it looks like no questions came up in the chat. There's one that I see, but it's been retracted, so I can't see it anymore. So I'm guessing that got answered. If not, Virgil, please write that in now. Otherwise, yeah, if you guys have any more questions, please go ahead and put that in the chat. But yeah, thanks guys for doing this. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Super, super informative. And I mean, now's the time to be talking about this kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah, I totally agree. The quarter of prep is 100% needed in a time like this, and obviously the best place to start was with the screenplay. So for everyone listening tonight, screenplay is king, in my opinion, personally. Let's all try and work to make better screenplays.
Yeah, and then I believe on Friday we have our next call, and that one is going to be about the legality of your script. And so, like, you've got something put together. Now, how do you put together, like, an artist statement and get your stuff copyrighted, that kind of thing. So, yeah, and that'll be hosted by Tim Paternal, I think is his last name, and then DCC representative Sam Grau and Emily Schumann. So that should be really cool, too. And we'll have, something once or twice a week, depending on how scheduling goes, for seemingly the whole quarter. So, should be cool. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions in, so I think we're good to sign off. If anybody does think of anything, feel free to email the DCC at, I'll put it in the chat, dcccinemacollaborative@gmail.com. So yeah, thanks guys again for doing this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Good stuff.